Hey y'all, back again to discuss the latest episode of Critical Role, episode 14, A Bridge Too Far. Continuing on with our Seekers table, though we have actually start this episode with our first flash over back to the soldiers table, specifically to Thimble and Tayor, as they discuss the logistics of getting Sid to Bolaire. While at the very end, Brennan does let him know that, yeah, Thimble, you've got ways of getting a whole cart into the city. That's not going to be an issue. We do use this moment to refocus some attention back on the bracers, which, given how they were discussed, seem to have both the effects of, I would assume, something akin to the gauntlets of ogre strength, which, if you watched campaign 1, Pike eventually got her hands on, to have a strength score of 19. They're a fun item and a good way of getting around strength requirements for builds that prioritize other stats. And also, apparently, hard to say if they necessarily cast or have the effect of bark skin on the wearer, or just are also bracers of defense. But it'd be very interesting if we have an unarmored paladin going around. But these would be very potent magical items, which, given how hard it was going to be for them to take down the Knight of Saramai, I'd be interested to see what Brennan's thought was if there was a scenario where they survived that fight but didn't take down the Knight, didn't actually get the bracers. And so the bracers being their reward for doing the extra hard thing of also taking down the Knight on top of surviving. It'd be interesting to go back and see. We know Brennan says he doesn't necessarily level scale combats for the level the parties are at, just for what makes sense in the world. So what his expectations were going into the fight would be very interesting. He hasn't necessarily said in any of the cooldowns, but he did multiple times in the combat draw attention to the gauntlets. I have a little heartbreaking moment of Thimble talking about she can't let anything happen. What if something happened to Octus when she wasn't there, and she cuts herself off, but it's very easy to see that Laura is playing Thimble as anything bad that happens when I'm not there is my fault, because that's what happened to Thiazi and it was my fault. So in addition to her, as Brennan put it, almost manic need to find the next distraction, we also have a large bit of guilt for being knocked out and not being able to get the rune to Thiazi to save him. And then we get the very, very interesting bit of world building where Tayor notices not just Thimble's dimming as something dims in the world, but that light is very similar or akin to Sid's and maybe by extension Tayor's own divine sense, meaning that rather than drawing on the divinity of the Shapers or associated celestials like the Halavar family, kind of drawing to no, they're connected to something older in the world, which does make me think about some of the questions I was wondering at the end of the Soldiers Table run, based on the flashback to the Pridesire father, some of the things he was telling Sid and Tayor when they were younger. That makes me wonder if the Beast Folk are not a race created by and bound to the Shapers. I'm probably going to be raising this a lot till we get an answer of what the seventh Shaper is, and what race they were tied to, because again, we have orcs, humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, and halflings confirmed. We don't have the seventh Shaper and their people confirmed. And again, we did see Amada, the bear folk druid, at the end of last episode and beginning of this episode. So we know the Nama are not the only beast folk. We get first conversation just between the four druids, with Amada first attempting to cast a restoration spell on Taisha, just in case she's under any sort of ill effect, which makes sense that given the kind of news she was bringing and world they are in, that would be a place to go. It makes me think, for those familiar with Campaign 2, a very crucial moment where they were able to get an NPC to join hands with the group just in time to cast Greater Restoration, which ended up restoring her memories to her and revealing that she was a key NPC that had been lost for quite some time. So very much of like, no, it makes sense that, a bunch of cleric and druid types in the fantasy world are just like, I don't want to assume malice from you based on what I know of you and your position, but I also want to make sure that malice is not inflicted upon you. The interesting thing with Hanan, the elven druid, even in the conversation with Taisha, was that I was clocking, given how he was presented at the very end of the last episode, I was expecting him to be a lot less reasonable. We get the line at the very end of the group conversation that kind of sets up why he is being as reasonable as he is, and then in the cooldown, Brennan was talking about a conversation that came up in the break with him and Abria, where they've played a lot of different games together, as players, as GM to player in either orientation. She's GM'd for him, he's GM'd for her. So they've had scenes where they've embodied various characters in disagreements and arguments, but that this was one of the first times the two of them got to play an argument where everyone present was a high wisdom character. And he talked in the cooldown about a very interesting dynamic when everyone present is, we're bad at lying, but good at reading people. And moreover, we're in a context where approaching each other in good faith has a basis. And so, again, very interesting, the cliffhanger at the end of the last episode set us up for, I was envisioning the Witch's Council from the Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, which, while those are all, again, high wisdom characters, the homebrew witch class for that campaign being a wisdom-based caster, and yet there were actors in that conclave approaching with malice, and the people they were targeted against knew they would be approached with malice, so that assumption of good faith was not there in that circumstance. It was very interesting to see how it manifests in an arguably similar setup with a very different context behind it, which is immediately made clear when the whole group comes in and we see Hanan is a lot more pissed off at Valus than he is about Octus. And we get the bit of context of the elven druids being the most persecuted members of the Old Path, because of how close they basically stepped on the foot of the elven goddess. And we get a little bit more answer as to something I brought up, how Valus treated Thimble, and kind of clocked like there's some knowledge not of individuals but of kind, elf to fairy, which across various D&D settings and D&D lore, elves often have a very strong connection with the Feywild, so I was wondering what that was here in Ahriman, and we don't get the full picture, but we do know that apparently Salandri, goddess of the elves, was married to the king of Faerie. So we get a bit of an explanation for the connection there, and why Thimble, in a conversation, kind of implied that Valus would know more about her people's history than she would. Thimble being from the Golden Orchard, which is a halfway point between Faerie and Ahriman, rather than fully into Faerie. And then we get the kind of book-ending roles of Octus's Nat 20 Intimidation at the start and Nat 20 Persuasion to kind of put the button on the moment. I remember noting, just, damn, Alex, at that point, and the combat hadn't even happened yet, so he was rolling real good in all the right times this episode. And it'll be interesting, again, in the cooldown, Brennan mentioning that, the Old Path has existed for thousands of years, but it's been in hiding for most of those. It's really only, come to openness in the last 70, so there isn't a lot of orthodox, this is the way we've always done it traditions, and, written law, and we know it's also not fully working in fixing the world, so the idea that they would be open to at least trying once they are assured that their comrade is not enchanted, and this young man seems possessed of a fully sentient mind, that maybe it's worth letting this see where it goes. And then we get the confirmation, and I get my little I called it moment when last episode there was that moment of you don't think stone is stone. And of course, a dwarven druid of the Circle of Stones would be the one to go, you know that's bone. So I absolutely loved it. But it was interesting to me, was based on how it was introduced in the overture. I thought there had been a celestial psychopomp that then died in the war and the Stone of Night Song was made from him. But rather we find that that it was made from the bone of the first celestial that almost died of grief when the first elf died, but sort of became this artifact that helped usher the souls across, and the nightingale psychopomp that we were told about, I'm guessing, used this stone in the transporting of the souls, or made it some sort of relic tied to that. Like, he took on the job, presumably out of affection for his lost brother and devotion to their goddess and the people that she had created. So it'd be very interesting if the stone itself is not actually supposed to do the job of a psychopomp, but is simply made from the remains of a celestial of life, killed by its grief over death, what magic it may have and why the Tacchonis wanted it. Because I know my original thought had been try to basically turn Octus into a ferryman that, instead of leading the dead on, kind of leads them under Tacchonis, like pulls them under the Tacchonis' control, grabs wandering spirits and pulls them in. I'm a little less certain about that now that we've got a little more background on whose bone the Stone of Night Song was made out of. But that remains to be seen, as there are currently a lot of questions floating around about what the Tacchonises were trying, and if they could potentially try again if they got their hands on the stone, Octus, or both. And then, of course, the idea of traveling via eagle is brought up, and I think any of us that are fans of Lord of the Rings instantly pricked our ears up at that. So here's hoping next week we actually get to see that. And I just wrote down, as Amada was like, okay, what can we do to help you? Like, honestly, transportation's not enough. Like, we need to find other ways to help. I think Amada's gonna be my Dame Morgaine of this table of the NPC that I am fond of and absolutely love and only want to see the best for. Give me the sweet Grandma Bear Druid. And honestly, I ended up liking Hanan a lot more than I thought I would. I think the line that kind of solidified that for me was the moment he told Octus at the end, "My readiness for blood will never render me a fool." And Brendan talked about the interesting thing of playing a high wisdom zealot, of like, I believe in this so strongly, but I am not letting it blind me. At least not entirely. Of like, it's very, very interesting characterization of this character, which I talked about kind of seeming a combination of Grimoire and, I keep wanting to call her a name that is not her name. I should have looked up the witches from the Witches' Council. But yeah, he seems to be leaning a little bit more towards the older Druid of the Wood, or Witch of the Wood, rather, in at least being able to hear out. Though we'll see if anything else comes of his little conflict with Valus, though I do like that he was wise enough to go like, okay, if this is important and my feelings are about to jeopardize it, like, I'm gonna remove myself from the temptation to act on the other things I'm feeling about this moment right here. And if all of that felt like it resolved far too easily for you, the fact that the back half of the episode was entirely combat kind of proves the explanation of like, oh, he could afford to let the druids let him off easy because we got the Tacchonis guards gonna stop them, and honestly, I know the demons are supposed to be scary, but there were too many moments that they got compared to some Who Framed Roger Rabbit characters in the cooldown. Yeah, it's like not quite Looney Tunes level, but definitely getting close to it in ridiculousness and how bad they are at this job. And like, wait, doesn't one of you have the ability to detect disguises? We're gonna kill all of you and wait for the disguise to drop off. Like, as they put it at the very end, apparently Tyranny is the most serious of her sisters and most competent. So yeah. But it was also interesting to get, this is one of the first times I've seen it in D&D. You do occasionally get it in video games. But a true three-way fight where it's not two different enemy factions working together to attack the players, or a neutral faction the players can sway to team up with. At any given moment, anyone from the other two factions could either attack the other faction or attack the party. And I understand why you don't see this a lot in D&D. That's a lot of things to balance, of keeping track of, and we did get some moments of a couple of the NPCs' turns would get grouped up together, and Brennan is flipping through stat blocks as he's rolling the various attacks and damages. He managed to keep it moving. I know I DM online, and I don't have a very large computer screen, so flipping through a lot of stat blocks is not always the easiest for me. I try to write down the relevant stuff, but too many enemies in a combat, not even then factoring in the enemies attacking each other rather than the party, can be a lot to handle. And it didn't happen in this because we had a ticking clock with, especially once we knew the sisters were coming, and just a bunch of like fun interactions. And it wasn't just that the enemies were only fighting each other and ignoring the party. So the party was involved enough that it didn't turn into Brennan basically playing out a combat by himself and the players watching. So I understand why in general people try to avoid that, to avoid a three-party conflict, to avoid that scenario, but I think it was handled very well in this case. I love that my brain keeps going to a couple of Fire Emblem maps where you actually have enemy armies that will get in each other's threat range and attack each other, and will also attack you if you enter either of their threat ranges. And so it was kind of, felt a little bit like some of those maps. And I did love that, for as serious as it was, especially at the end once the twins were coming, there were just too many moments where Brennan's comedic instincts show themselves. And/or he mentioned, apparently Whitney created the other demonic sisters as NPCs in her backstory. I don't know how much about them she wrote, but Brennan specifically described it as Whitney giving him some very fun characters to play with. So I don't know if that means she just gave him the names and he ran with it, or if she told him a little bit about their personalities and he's getting to revel in that. Plus, I just love the moment of the bad dice roll on I'm Franz Tacchonis, manifesting that they were now dealing not with a vassal house, but with Franz. Where it kind of felt like a moment out of Dimension 20, where that wasn't true before, but it is now because that's the better story. And I mean, it makes sense of the okay, why would a random vassal know that you're not Franz? The one thought is I've met Franz and you don't look like whatever, but the more interesting one is, no, that is Franz. So it's a little bit of the comedic instinct, but it also is just a general storytelling instinct of it was ended up being played a little bit for comedy, but you can also play that same thing for drama of I've committed, oh shit, that's him, we're in trouble. And I just love the line, this isn't good or bad for you, just different, on when the demonic sisters tried to dominate Franz, as kind of driving home again, this isn't two armies ganging up on you, nor is it you can turn one of these into an ally. This is truly a three-way combat. He's going to be against you either way, but is he going to be under his own control, or is he going to be under theirs? And also, I love, again, I talked last episode about how Aranessa is sort of the example of how to do a DM tag-along NPC correctly. She is not a DM PC. She's very much a tag-along NPC, where she is helpful without being overshadowing. And especially, like, once we get out of the social interactions within the Sundered House, because again, like, there was a social interaction at the start of this episode, her biggest contribution is, like, sidling up next to Julian and going, like, okay, you've clocked an exit, right? Just in case this goes bad? And even remarking, like, for once, it's not about us. And so here we are in combat, which we've seen from the assault on Palazzo Divinos. She is not absolutely helpless at it, but she doesn't really have much in the way of, like, I don't know that we've seen her cast a damaging spell. So we see her first action with the casting of the haste on Julian, which, as far as a go-to strategy goes, when in doubt, buff the Marshal and make him hit more is not a bad strategy. And then when she sees that he's trying to push Franz off to try to capitalize on that, it really feels like either both her spell list and how Brennan plays her lean into the, like, Fae styling and approach. She's not about dealing direct damage, but about capitalizing on a situation, or providing aid to an ally, or sort of, I think of almost like the fairy curse or bad luck on her enemies. So, like, I mean, think of spells like Fairy Fire or the Archfey Warlock in 2024 that's all about bamfing around, but they have taunts and illusions and ways of giving out temporary HP, where it's less about being a direct damage dealer, though with it being a warlock, you absolutely can be a direct damage dealer. I've played at a table with two, one being a caster focus, one being a blade lock, and both of them could, when they needed to, deal out the damage. But about looking at the situations and seeing what else you can do. She's a toolbox caster. She's got a bunch of tools, and when she sees the situation, pull one out. Honestly, you don't tend to see it as much with sorcerers, just how their spell list lines up, but it can very much be how you see some bard players play, with their spell list being a lot more utility focus. And as someone that appreciates that playstyle but isn't always the best at it, it's very fun to see, and is a great way of, again, creating this NPC that helps the party without overshadowing the party. She's just there to set them up and make them better at what they're already trying to do. And I think my last little mechanical note is I am a DM that also loves pulling the mix and match skills and stats. I need to do it more with the actual skills. I tend to do a lot with my tool proficiencies. I tell my players when they take a tool proficiency not to assign the stat that the tool proficiency uses, because also I don't actually know what stat any of the tool proficiencies are tied to. But, like, there are times where you're using your alchemist's tools and it's much more about remembering your recipe, so you're rolling with intelligence, or maybe you're carefully trying to mix a volatile cocktail, and that would be more dexterity and, like, can you do it without blowing it up in your face? Using a poisoner's kit with wisdom to try to like suss out a poison, versus, again, dexterity, sleight of hand, to coat and apply without hurting yourself. I want to start playing a little bit more with what Brennan did here, specifically to the moment where he let Alex choose between rolling a persuasion check using his intelligence stat, or an arcana check using his charisma stat. I just think it's a very fun way to say, like, in this situation, like, you're your proficiency bonus kind of showing your like expertise and comfort with a particular area of focus, but the way you're approaching it may not be always intelligence focus for Arcana. Like again, like he was trying to convince someone of the truth based on a spell he had cast as a wizard. So that particular mix match was very interesting to me. And I take this as sort of a reminder to look more into doing that myself as a DM. And with that, we just barely get off the bridge before the twins land, with the successful stealth check being retroactively decided. I can't remember if they said it at the table or the cooldown being the successful check being because the one demonic sister like disguised herself as Octus, so the twins getting distracted long enough by a guard going, and those 2 minutes buying the group time to get up to the Eyrie. But suffice it to say, we were on the steps to the Eyrie. Hopefully Amada is up there, and that nothing has happened to her, and we shall find out what the Eagles have in store, and maybe if our group can get paid at some point. But yeah, a little bit of a shorter video. And again, when the episodes are mostly combat, I may write down interesting moments, but we have seen this group in combat before, so there wasn't a lot of like new things to comment on besides finally getting to see Alex's spells hit so he can flavor them. First 2 combats did not go great for our wizard, but nice to see that now that he's already died once, he's doing a lot better in combat. But yeah, a little bit early this week, but my Tuesday is going to be a little stacked, so I wanted to get the video out rather than risk running into a double episode next week. With that being said, I will see you all next week, and again, I won't post this video till after the episode goes live on Monday, so you likely will see this Tuesday morning. For context, I recorded this on Sunday, because it was going to be the only time I was going to have time to record it. But yeah, I will see you all next week with our next breakdown. Bye, y'all.